Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Command the Courtroom Live. And I'm your host, Wendy Hernandez. As you know, I'm the founder of Command the Courtroom. And hi, everybody out there. I just want to do a couple quick shout outs to the Tenacious Warrior. She's my trusty right hand woman, always helping me out. Linda Marie, Raul, I'm so grateful to see you. You show up every week. So I'm sure more people will be joining us. And while we're waiting for people to come in, I'm just going to give a quick disclaimer, and then I'm going to introduce my fabulous guest. So as you guys know, I'm an attorney. I'm only an attorney in Arizona. This show is not meant to offer legal advice. It's for educational purposes only. Remember that you have to follow the rules and the laws of your jurisdiction, wherever that may be. And it, could be in a state other than Arizona. I know it could be in a different country. There's a lot of people who watch the show from other countries. So wherever you all are, check your local rules and laws. And also, just be mindful of the ecosystem here. I know most people who are on the stream are respectful and kind with one another. Remember that if you say something, quote, bad, it possibly could end up as Exhibit A in a courtroom case against your ex if they're on this chat and they're listening and watching, but not saying anything. So please pay attention to what you say. So with that, I want to introduce my guest. So today's guest is Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. She's a physician turned relationship and intimacy expert. After 12 years in medicine helping families heal their bodies, she studied the science and art of emotional and sensual connection to help her patients heal their relationships as well. So, for 2 decades, she has been guiding men and women to bring pleasure and purpose back into all aspects of their life, from the daily grind of running a household to creating ecstatic experiences in the bedroom. That sounds pretty good. So, so I want to welcome Alexandra. Thank you for being here at the show today, Alexandra.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. I'm really excited for our conversation and ready to dive in. It's a good topic.
I think it's a fantastic topic. So today, I didn't mention it, but we're gonna lead off with some things that are direct. I can't talk tonight that are not directly on topic, but we'll get to the topic. And we're going to talk about, though, is introducing a new partner after a breakup, either a divorce or a separation. So introducing that partner to the children and to your ex. But first, Alexandra, we had a wonderful conversation a few weeks ago about divorce and your experiences with divorce and your perspective on divorce. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share a little bit about that background that you have that is, I think, kind of unique.
Yes. Honestly, I don't remember exactly what I said. So if I omit something juicy, please go ahead and remind me. I was 9 when my parents got divorced. Actually, I think this is one of the things I told you, that my parents got divorced in 1978 in New York State. And at that time, they did what was called a do-it-yourself divorce. There may be a legal term for it, but basically they didn't have attorneys. There was no mediator. I think it cost like $25 for them to get divorced. However, in 1978, in New York State, there had to be a reason to get divorced. And my parents were very clear they wanted to get divorced. And so they lied. They made up domestic abuse, saying that my father had hurt my mother in order to be able to divorce amicably and inexpensively. And I actually didn't know this. Both of my parents have since died, but in the divorce decree, which I found after my mother had died, it spelled this out very clearly. But my mother had made a point to tell my brother that it wasn't true, that they had done this in order to make the legal system work for them. And my mother really didn't want my brother growing up thinking that this is what his father had done to his mother, because it never happened, but that was their ticket to separate.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't know any of that. I have to say that from the outside, it looked like I had a good situation because my parents did their best to prioritize my brothers and my experience. And so actually, after my parents got divorced, My father used to come for dinner every Thursday night for about a year, and it looked like everything was amicable. At one point when I was 10 or 11, I used to roll my eyes and say my parents discussed like they made decisions together with a lot more care and communication than they ever did when they were living together and married. And so it was a little bit annoying. I couldn't get away with anything because they were wanting to work so hard to communicate. So that all sounds really good. But in fact, that is not at all how it lives in me. Um, I remember just with total clarity when my parents told us that they were getting divorced. In fact, I think, in the 1970s, there was a lot more shame and complication around divorce. I sure hope that while divorce isn't necessarily something to celebrate, I mean sometimes it is in certain aspects, it's not something people generally aspire to when they get married, but like no one's going to ever think less of you because you're divorced. But that wasn't true 30, 40, 50 years and so on. So growing up in the 1970s, I think that trend started to shift.
Mhm.
But my parents, when they told us, I remember so clearly, we sat at breakfast, and my father didn't say anything the whole time. And my mother said, "We're going to become unmarried."
Interesting.
And I was 10 years old at the time. And I said, "You mean you're getting a divorce?" And my mother said, "Yes." And then my father said, "We have to get going," because they had planned for us to go. This was in northern New York State, where we were at the time, and in near Montreal. So we drove north across the border to Canada. Near Montreal, there's an African safari park. And so I think they planned that they would give us this news and then we'd go have a fun day to kind of make it all feel better. I have no idea what they were thinking, but
Wow.
it was like, your parents are getting divorced, here's some ice cream. It was equivalent to that. So
Yeah.
they said they were getting unmarried, and then we all got in the car and we went to the African safari park where we drove through, and there were monkeys on the car. I remember a baboon trying to remove the mirror. But anyway, the point is that it was just complete denial of the emotional truth of the situation. And
Yes.
so from the outside, it looked like a very smooth transition. And I was grateful that no one was smashing walls and breaking furniture and being violent. I certainly was always grateful. But it also was very disorienting to me because it was like this massive shift had happened. Everything in my life was completely different, but it was a 90-second conversation. Then off we went to the safari park. So
Mhm.
this has been a source of a lot of learning for me about what these conversations really need to be. And I'll just add super quickly that this went on when my father had different relationships, even when a woman was moving in and then they got engaged. He never told me. And years later, I said, "How could you have not told me?" And he said, "Well, I didn't know how." And
Wow.
one of the reasons I want to be on this show is so that I don't know how is not a reason that anyone listening doesn't actually speak with their children, because it matters so much that you actually have meaningful, age appropriate conversations with time for dialogue.
Thank you, Alexandra. That is heartbreaking. Do you remember when you were going through this experience and you were hearing your mom saying we're going to be unmarried? Like, how were you feeling? Did it hit you like a ton of bricks, or how were you feeling? Did you see it coming?
You know what? It didn't hit me like a ton of bricks, but I think before that, I was a somewhat like peaceful, quiet, pretty little girl. And within, you can see it in the pictures, within about a year, I started to become round and overweight. And what I mean by that is that I ate instead of really feeling my emotions, in case that's not clear. That's what I mean when I say that. And I did that for a long time. And then the other thing is that whereas I might have felt sad or I don't know what, I just immediately disconnected from my emotions. There was zero modeling of
Mm,
how to feel the whole range of feelings, the sadness, the excitement about new possibilities. I mean, not that there was a lot there, but there were a whole bunch of feelings. And instead, I just went super intellectual and in my head and disconnected from my heart. And the main thing that I remember being upset about is that at the same time that we heard this, the one other detail that I elicited was that my father was going to be moving in with our favorite babysitter, who was a single woman. And as I kept asking questions, I don't think it was right in that conversation, but it was soon thereafter. It was clear that she was preparing the apartment for the two of them to live in, which meant she had known for months about this divorce, which
wow.
took place in June, but I found out in August at the end of the summer. Because I went to summer camp and my parents didn't want to say, we're getting divorced. And off I went to sleepaway camp for the first time. So they waited very deliberately until I came back. But what was apparent to my logical mind was that this babysitter had known for months. And the thing that hurt me the most that day was that she had known for months and I didn't know.
Yeah, that's so difficult.
That's the thing that I had access to feeling, but the feelings about my parents actually splitting up, I didn't have access to, honestly, for years, because that just wasn't the culture of the moment.
Okay. Great. So thank you for sharing that story. And I remember when divorce started becoming more widespread and I was, oh, I don't know, maybe 10 years old. And I remember living in the town where I grew up in, and a friend of mine came to school and she was just so upset one day because she said her mother had left and she was going to live with her dad and that was it. And she was heartbroken, and then it seemed like divorce started hitting different families. It was a new thing, and it was terrifying for me as a child. Every time my mom and dad would argue, my brothers and I would cry because we were afraid that they were going to get a divorce. So it makes sense to me that, a child who's going through this really needs to be connected with emotionally and comforted. So talk to me about what parents should be saying to their children to have a different conversation than the conversation your parents had with you about divorce.
I will, but I'm going to add one thing before I do this. So
Okay.
I'm a doctor. I no longer practice medicine. I work with individuals and couples on relationships and intimacy and family sometimes too. But when I practiced medicine, I noticed at one point that I basically spontaneously developed a specialty because I had so many different, sometimes just one parent and sometimes couples consult me about how to talk to their children about the fact that they were going to split.
Mm,
And I just think that we feel things in people that we don't always understand. And that I never advertised this, I never spoke about it. What I've just shared with you, I've never discussed publicly before. Like, this is not, but somehow people could feel that I had something. So I've actually advised, I don't know, many parents on how to discuss this with their children. And the reason I'm saying that is both to say that I'm going to draw on those experiences. And if we're feeling something, or if there is some defining characteristic in us, even if we don't talk about it and we don't think about it, other people can feel it. So I really think the question in talking to children is how to make it age appropriate and how to make it fit your family culture. But if you think that you're shielding your children from the truth, that's true for their conscious minds, but it's not true for the rest of them. Like, we feel things even if we don't know what it is.
Right.
So, like, I just want to say that.
Yes.
So when it comes to telling children, it definitely depends on how old they are. But one of the things I want to emphasize is it's not a one and done conversation. I think most conversations that parents have with children, if we don't really make an effort, we treat them as one and done, and nothing should be done that way. Whether we're telling our kids about sex, about divorce, well, those are the big things that come to mind.
Yeah.
Um, it's much more that what we want to do is begin a dialogue, give just the amount of information that the child can receive and digest in that conversation, and make clear that the door is open for whenever the child is ready for the next conversation. Because if you have 3 children, they're not just, assuming it's not triplets, they're not just different ages. They have different personalities, they have different ways of relating to everyone in the family. And you might speak to all of them, and then one of them has a lot more questions, but the others are ready to go off and play. And
Got
maybe
it.
one of them circles back after hearing a story or learning about something in history, and then they come back and have more questions. So I think it's really important to make it fluid. And I think it's extremely important, unless you have like a 4-year-old and a 14-year-old, then what I'm saying doesn't apply. But when we're talking about children who are relatively within the same age range, it's really important that you tell them together.
Ah, interesting. Yes.
I
Tell
think
me.
I think it's important to tell together because this is a change that is happening for the whole family. The ideal would be for both parents and all children to be there at the same time. Now, in some divorces, the parents are not going to be on the same page, and that's not possible. But ideally, you include as many people in the family as possible so that everyone is participating. As the culture of the family shifts, everyone is an equal participant. Even if everyone doesn't have the same ability to understand, you don't want people asking what was said in that conversation.
Right.
You want everyone to feel included, and then you can have whatever private conversations need to be had afterwards. I think that this is so important. Even if you know one child's going to be happy, one's indifferent, and one's going to be really mad at you because you're leaving dad or whatever the case may be, for the sake of the family and the children feeling the belonging as things are shattering around them, you want to make that first communication with everyone together.
Thank you. I love how you're breaking it down. I've never had anybody break this down for me as an attorney, and I get asked this question all the time in my practice. And I'm not, I don't have any kind of medical degree or psychological degree, or I don't do therapy or counseling. So I've never been quite sure how to answer it. And I agree with you, Alexandra, that both parents should be present if possible. But what if, because I think there are a lot of cases or situations where both parents cannot be possible. Maybe the conflict is so high that they can't do it in a healthy way, or maybe there's abuse. Um, do you have suggestions for an individual parent who's addressing this with the children, especially if the children start asking questions and questions about the other parent? I think it can be tricky.
It can be very tricky. And what I'm about to say is a general principle, but I want to be very clear that there are times when you want to have exceptions. Basically, the thing to strive for is not to speak ill of the other parent. And there are a few reasons for this, but I'm going to go to the deepest and most important one first. Any child is literally the product of both parents. Even if you've had a sperm donor or an egg donor, psychologically, that child is the product of both parents. They are born of both parents coming together and they have both parents in them. And so the challenge, I'll speak as though I'm the child, so it's very clear. If my mother is saying that my father's a jerk and I don't know what kind of language we want to use here, but just like speaking very negatively about my father, or my father is speaking that way about my mother, I'm both of them. And that means that I feel, I'm going to say this word, I don't mean it literally, but like I have split personality or I feel schizophrenic. Like, what do I do if my mother can't stand my father? I know I have mannerisms. In my case, my hair color and my eye color and my gait are totally inherited from my father and not my mother. So if my mother were to be speaking ill of my father, even if she totally loves me and doesn't mean it this way, I'm going to internalize that as some parts of me are terrible. Like
Mhm.
I'm going to want to separate from some parts of me. And so what I really encourage parents to do, especially when things are not friendly, is to say to the child, like, love the parts of them that are like the father. So in the example I gave, my mother might say to me, I just love your eyes. You really have the eyes of your father, and they're so beautiful. Like, you can always find things that are positive forms of the other parent as they live in the child, which doesn't mean that you ever want to look in that father's eyes again. That is not the point. But the point is to honor how the other parent continues to live in the child, because otherwise the child is stuck reconciling these two aspects. And you do your children a great service not to leave them in the situation where they have to reconcile two halves of themselves, which are always together but feel in conflict internally.
Yes.
So if the mother was an avid reader and the child is loves to read, even if the father can't stand the mother, to say, oh, you have your mother's love of reading, you're going to be so educated. You can say that sincerely if you get over yourself, and it doesn't mean anything about how fond you are of the parent, but it is one of the biggest gifts you can give your children after a divorce.
Thank you so much. That's a beautiful, beautiful piece of advice, something I've never heard or thought of. So that's wonderful because I think sometimes people feel really hard pressed to say something nice about the other parent. But, you've just kind of spun this in a way and given me a fresh perspective. So thank you. I love that.
And you don't have to say something positive about the parent, but
Right.
more how the parent lives in the child. And
Yeah.
I also want to say, if you've separated because the other parent had an affair and was super nasty and doesn't want the kids to know, that, depending on the age of the children, if they think it's all your fault that you left, but you were responding to a situation that the other parent caused, I'm not a fan of keeping that a secret forever. Like, the children deserve to know the truth, because if they don't know truth, they're making up stories. And you can give like the bare minimum of the truth so they get the general idea without dragging people from them through the mud and treating your children as your confidants and giving all the details. I'm not recommending that. That is not appropriate. But to pretend things were rosier than they were, or to like let the children draw conclusions which are very wrong about what occurred, I don't actually, I mean, if we have a 4-year-old, fine. But 14, 16, children will make up stories about what happened so that it is coherent in their minds. And if they're missing some of the important details, they're going to make up stories that aren't true. And so there's a way to share the basic truth without like pouring all the emotionality on them at the same time. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So could you give a for example? So for example, say the other parent was abusive in some way and the children are asking, well, mommy or daddy, why did you leave? How can you give us a for example how to be truthful without dragging the other parent through the mud?
Um, I want to acknowledge that every situation is unique. So again, I'm conveying a principle, but in that example, you might say, Daddy gets really angry, and it wasn't good for me to be there when he was angry. That's plenty for a 5, 6, 7 year old.
Okay. Perfect. And so Jules Verne, who's very active, and Jules is all the way in Australia, and she's, among other things, an astrologist. And Jules, I want to bring up today's a special day. I think it's the solstice here, and I think there are two planets that are in alignment. That's what I've heard: Jupiter and Saturn, right? So we're supposed to have a beautiful star. But, anyways, that's beside the point.
So
um,
this question, should we respond to this question? What if the child comes back to say the other parent spoke ill of the mom or dad? Just say they're ill. You know, I think that's super tricky. If you have a young child who's kind of all in fantasy and not living in a very specific logical world, yeah, you could say that. But I suggest looking for a way to say the truth without specifically putting down the other parent. So if the other, let's say, the father says something terrible about the mother's personality, and so then the child comes and repeats this, then um, one option is to see if this child knows anyone in school who's a bully and say, "Oh, that sounds a lot like when Freddie made fun of your hat," or whatever. The point is, excuse me. The point is to make it relatable in the children's existence. So one of the things that I would recommend, I think this is a good idea for all children, but specifically around the time of divorce, to be reading lots of stories. Because then you have, like, to read stories aloud, and then you have reference points to refer to. So maybe in this case, where the father has spoken badly about the mother and the child says it, you could say, "Oh, that's just like Cinderella's stepmother." Because when you give a reference point, it helps the child process it. You don't need to do the analyzing and the processing and the just making it logical. That's not appropriate for children. But if you give them an image, then they can work with it, because we all know what happens to Cinderella's stepmother, but the child can just let that happen in the realm of images and unconsciousness. Another thing, this is slightly off topic, but I think it's really great. I don't have any titles to recommend, but you might come up with a library, Wendy, for your clients, that to come up with titles where the book isn't specifically about divorce, which is what many parents seek out,
right.
but other stories in which divorces happen. So it allows the children to be able to see other ways that children and parents have dealt with it. gives them more emotional intelligence around it, even if it's not explicitly focused on divorce as the theme in the book. Tenacious Warrior said something, but I was speaking, and so I didn't. Oh, make it relatable in the child's ability to comprehend and understand in their own age appropriate understanding. Absolutely. And so you can see that if you say, oh, that's just like Cinderella's stepmother, then the child knows, like, it's like otherwise they're biting something and they can't chew it up and digest it and take the nutrition and get rid of the rest. But if you give them an image, then you don't have to do anything else except keep loving them the way you already do. And they will be able to work with that and put it in its place.
Excellent. That's another really great tidbit that I have never heard before. So many valuable nuggets of wisdom here, Alexandra. Thank you. So, another thing that I really want to talk to you about, because this again comes up all the time in my cases, comes up on this live stream. I get emails about it constantly. And that is, um, okay, parties are separated. They may not necessarily be divorced, but they're separated, could be going through divorce, could be going through court proceedings. And now somebody has a new significant other. Um, and people often don't know how to talk with the children about it. They often don't know how to talk with the ex partner about it. And I'm hoping you have some ideas, thoughts, suggestions in that area too.
Yeah, so I want to be clear first that if the parents are separated and there's any legal ramifications around whether or not there's a new partner, like I'm not speaking to that at all. I'm just speaking to the emotional health and clear
Yes.
communication
Thank you.
because there may be times when it's not good legal strategy to introduce a new partner yet.
Yes.
But that's your department.
It's my department.
Yeah. So the first thing is that parents often want to shield their children from further heartbreak, from more transitions. So, waiting until the relationship or the connection is established enough to be worth mentioning, I think that is a good plan. I mean, if you have like a 17 and 18-year-old children, you're going out on a date, let them know that you're having joy in what you're doing. But for children who are younger, I can see really waiting. And then, yeah, there are three different people to involve, and let's look at each one separately. There are times when you can tell the children first, and times when you can tell the ex first. That's going to depend on the situation and the age of the children. But when talking to the children, the ideal is to really make room for whatever arises because some may be totally fine, happy you found someone. Others, it may be like, even though you've been divorced for 2 years, now that you're dating someone else, you're really never going to get back together. And you might know which your child is how they're gonna respond, but be open for some surprises. And so, kind of like what I was saying earlier, I suggest you bring something up in a very simple, kind, and actually short way. And then if they have questions, then answer them. But the important thing is to make clear that this is open dialogue. So, for example, I mean, and sometimes they already know the person if he or she is part of your life, and sometimes it's a new introduction. But I suggest that you maybe you know someone like another family where there's a step parent and you can refer to that, something that makes it normalized and familiar, like remember when Janie's mother married Steve, and they're like, yeah. And then you can say, well, I don't know that I'd start right with marriage if it's the first time, but someone who started dating someone, you can say, well, I found someone special and I wanted you to know. Like
Mm,
to make the conversation about your relationship with your children rather than to make the conversation about your relationship with this
mm.
new partner.
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I have to type a comment and post it on the lower third. Make the conversation about your relationship with your children and not about the relationship
With the
with
partner.
the partner.
So
Brilliant.
the goal is not that they approve of your new relationship. Like you're the parent and you get to decide what you're going to do. But the goal is that you feel more connected with, that the children and you feel connected, or at least there's opening to continue to grow and explore and work out whatever complications there are. So I think that's probably the most important principle for talking with the children. Now, when talking with the ex, it again is going to depend if you're good friends with the ex or you're just informing the ex because he's your children's parent and he deserves to know what's happening in your children's lives. And often parents want to know before their children about these things. And so, if nothing else, I suggest you clarify this with your ex. Do you have an agreement to tell one another first? Do you not have that agreement? Whatever agreement you have, you want to honor it. And I actually suggest, unless there's a toxic, abusive situation, but if things are basically kind, I suggest you say, we had a good relationship, or mentioned a good memory from when the family was together. Like, honor something positive in the relationship that is no longer, if that's relevant, and then say, and I'm ready to create something like that with someone new, and I wanted you to know I've met someone. Like, there's a way in which when you tell your ex about your new relationship, it brings up all the wounds of the past, and then it can create complications. But if you, again, honor the relationship with the ex in that conversation, it's a good strategy for being able to move ahead with more freedom and ease and delight in the new relationship.
Love
Now,
it.
if it's someone who's toxic or abusive, then you just need to communicate what you need to communicate and make the boundaries clear. I'm really suggesting honoring the relationship which has ended with someone that you have good rapport with and you feel collaborative. And you should know that no matter what you've established and no matter how long it's been that way, things are going to shift when you have a partner and your ex knows. So you want to just acknowledge that and have that be part of the dialogue between the two of you.
Excellent.
And you're not asking permission. You're giving the gift of including someone in something important, but you are not asking permission or approval. So don't say anything that sounds like you are, because that sets up a dynamic that isn't actually going to work for you down the road potentially.
Got it. Okay. So, when it's not an abusive or not a toxic relationship with the ex, it can be still kind and but firm. You're not asking
Yeah.
for permission. And if there's an abusive relationship with the ex, essentially it's providing information in a firm way.
Yeah, and honestly, what I think is the trickiest situation when telling an ex about a relationship is, let's say you haven't really been with anybody else, at least not that anyone knows about, since the divorce. Now you've started a relationship, someone you've been talking to and seen a few times, and it's clearly going to be a serious relationship. And your ex has had lots of so-called relationships, lots of partners coming and going for a few months at a time, always wanting to introduce them to the kids. That's the trickiest situation because you want to include your wholesome relationship and have the children be involved, and you want to protect the children from the revolving door. And it's very, very hard to establish something which looks like it's not equal, because then that other partner is going to be like, well, you're introducing them. Why can't I?
Right.
And acknowledging the good in the relationship before, and naming some time when this person showed up for you in a good way, or some time you enjoyed, or the way you celebrated the holidays back in, you know, 2010, whatever. That's paving the way for the two of you to draw on the time you were together as a family so you can be collaborative for the good of the children. That's what that's doing.
Got it. Got it.
Should we transition to our third scenario with the partner?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So, what I'm going to say about the partner, I think there are a lot of people who wouldn't agree, but I feel quite strongly about it, that it's easy to put the children first, and then the partner you're bringing in always has a back seat in when it comes down to important things. In fact, I experienced this with my stepfather, who paid half the mortgage in the house. He and my mother,
Mhm.
they well, actually, no, they paid my mother and my stepfather paid the mortgage, even though my mother and father jointly owned the house because they didn't separate that in their peaceful divorce. And my stepfather drove us to our rehearsals and our practices and was a very hands on parent. And whenever it came time to decide anything really important, like about college, or when to whether to discuss sex with us, or anything that was really formative, my mother was always clear, he's not the parent. But when
Mhm.
it came to any of the day-to-day chores and participation, then he certainly was a responsible parent. Now, I don't have a overall solution about that, because it's true he wasn't the parent, but he was invested like a parent, and I'm just giving that example because if you prioritize your relationship with your children, it's basically creating a wall between you and your new partner, a wall which will eventually limit how close you can grow with one another. So, how exactly you're going to get there is going to depend on your situation, everyone's emotional intelligence, how old the children are, how much wounding there is with the divorce, all these things. But the thing to aim for, honestly, for your sake and your children's sake, is that the relationship between the adults is the priority, and the children can relax in the safety of that. And if the mother won't make any decision with the new partner unless the children approve,
Mm.
that will undercut that relation. It's just not healthy for anybody.
Got it.
So it's a little tricky, because until you're committed to your new partner, you're more committed to your children. But I want to really invite you to, anyone listening, to set things up so that the adults can have the adult relationship and the children get to be the children and not the parents' partners, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So I highly recommend being very direct and explicit with the new partner. Like, where is your relationship going to be in the hierarchy of everything? And what needs to the new partner do you have? Like, are you happy to join our family the way it is? Or do you want it to be that you and I are the couple and we basically form a new family? I'm not making a strong recommendation any which way, but the more you can discuss the different options, and most of all, express your fears, the more collaborative, healthy, and ultimately passionate the relationship will be.
Excellent.
And the other thing I just want to add is that it's important for the incoming new partner to just not take personally the children's initial response,
Mm,
because that initial response has just about nothing to do with who that person is and everything to do with how their world is changing. And I think that's important to remember. It's not a report card on how good you are with children if they can't stand you. If they can't stand you, it might be that, but it also just might be that they're yearning for the family that is no more.
that's right. Okay. That's really, really great advice, Alexandra. So Oswell had a question that I thought maybe you could help with, kind of melds the two, areas, which were, talking to the children and then new
Yeah.
partner. Do you have any thoughts on that
Yeah.
question?
So I think that's I'm glad you've asked it. I think that's a common scenario. So I want to know, have you already spoken with the kids about the new partner? Or are they first hearing about it from the ex? All's well if you're here. Do you have a response to that? Because I think that makes a difference. If you are the one who's spoken about your new partner to your kid, then you get to establish how that conversation goes. But if your ex is the one who finds out about the relationship and tells the kid, then you're like backtracking and trying to overcome the first impressions. And those are two different scenarios. So maybe I'll speak to them both.
Okay. Yes.
This question should inspire anyone who's not in this situation to really make sure that the communication is happening between you and your children. You want to have control of the quality of that dialogue. Because if you are open and available for more conversations and you tell the kid about the partner, what you like about them, what your hope is, then that is the first impression. And anything the ex says is going to be weighed against the first impression. So be the one to open that dialogue. If that hasn't happened and the ex has started, then it again depends on the age of the child. But if the child is, let's say, 12 and older, I would be direct. I would say, I think daddy's feelings are hurt because I'm with someone else. And his feelings are hurt and he wants you to hurt with him. Because that's the truth of the matter. Okay, my ex still tries sabotaging my relationship by saying negative things about my husband, even though we're married and have been together for years. Oh, 8. Okay. Um, all right. I have a response, which is there's a book, maybe I'll post it afterwards, that I highly recommend you read. It's about the victim triangle. And you can explain the victim triangle to an 8-year-old in very simple terms. I'm not
Mm,
going to give the whole description right now because it's beyond the scope of what we're talking about. But the main thing is that with an 8-year-old, and you've already been married for a while, there's a lot more years of this to come. So there's no point in hoping for unicorns and rainbows. You need to face it. And I I think what I would do, I'm going to recommend the book, but also we all know that bullies have been bullied, that when
mm.
people are hurt, they go into shutdown and get quiet and freeze, or they go into fight and bully. And it's easier to just sabotage someone else's relationship than to feel the pain of the loss of the relationship or whatever his pain is. So what I would suggest you do, all's well, is start looking at other people and maybe children your 8-year-old knows. And anytime you see, or TV shows, like wherever, books, whatever you have as places where you see someone being mean to somebody else, and point out that the one who's being mean must really be hurting.
Mm.
You can find this in any children's story. You can find this in any TV show. You can find, because this is one of the qualities of human life, that when we are hurt, we either go into fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And anyone, if your ex is putting down your husband, that is just pure fight because he's hurt. And whether he was hurt by you or hurt in childhood, like none of that matter. Right. Hurt people. Exactly. So what I'm recommending is, instead of essentially putting your ex down, which is doing exactly what your ex is doing by putting your husband down, instead, just make part of your family conversation the things that everyone in your family understands, meaning your husband, you, and your 8-year-old son, that when people are mean, it's because they're hurting. And that way, he has a way to process what's happening. That's my suggestion, because the fact is that, if nothing else, divorce means that children really need to develop their emotional intelligence more rapidly than children have the luxury of doing otherwise. So it's not about, I I wouldn't get into saying that your ex is a liar, for example, because what does a child do with that? But
Right.
saying that your ex must be so sad that he can't be your father anymore, and instead the new husband is the one here parenting you. He wishes he could, and so he's hurt and he's saying something mean. But I'm not talking about like a whole analytical processing. I'm really talking about like sprinkling this in, as you go through life, making observations about how people are behaving when you're watching a movie together. Like, it doesn't need to be like this, it can come in indirectly and less confrontationally. And that creates a much more reliable foundation.
Yes, I love this. So, stories, books, movies, and like you said, just kind of sprinkling them in, and it gives the child or children kind of a framework to operate for them to kind of put this experience under. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it is. And I have a suggestion. I haven't done it. I don't know what's gonna come of it, but this is my suggestion also, that there are some really wonderful educational materials for schools around bullying. And I would look that up and see if any of it applies to working with your 8-year-old, because basically his father is being a bully, but you don't need to call him that. You can just work with the principles that people work with when addressing these kinds of issues.
Okay, thank you, Alexandra. And so I'm going to ask you if it's okay. One more question. Before we started, Alexandra said, "How long are we going to go?" I said, "About half hour," and here we are, almost an hour.
It's
So
fine. It's fine. I'm glad to engage.
thank you. These are great questions and wonderful answers. So Joni Ricketts, she's a longtime viewer, had a question, and I think that what comes up for people, and sometimes in the courtroom and with judges, is when one parent is talking to the children and being honest with the children, this is framed as the parent coaching the children. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, especially if a parent feels like they're just being honest with the children, and now, a coach or the other parents, or I'm sorry, an attorney or the other party is saying that that parent is coaching them. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, let me think about it for a minute. It's a new question to me. So,
Yeah.
um, oh, teach.com has some great, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the ecosystem of a two household family is actually very similar to what's happening in a school, um, in the way that we meant it. So, what I would say the first time I'm thinking about this, about coaching versus telling the truth, it's in how simply you speak. So, it's tempting when you're telling the truth to want to kind of convey a whole web of understanding. And my recommendation is to keep it as simple as possible. And um, if you have an 8-year-old, speak like you're talking to a 3-year-old, not with your tone of voice, because 8-year-olds get offended by that. But I just mean in terms of the level of concepts. And if you're talking to a 15-year-old, talk with the level of concepts you might speak with an 8-year-old, because they can always ask questions if they want to know more. But I'm guessing that, I mean, first of all, if the other parent's attorney is saying that, they're just accusing, and that's sort of the way the legal tussle goes. But if we look at that as a valid concern, I would say coaching is really is being invested in what the child believes, like wanting them to see things the way you do. That's not the goal of telling the truth. The goal of telling the truth is just keeping it so simple that they have access to what's real. I'm going to give an example. It has nothing to do with families, but when I talk about simple, it's the difference between saying the sky is blue versus the atmosphere has these qualities and the light waves pass through, and when the light waves, I don't know my, you know,
Okay.
but like
That's me
when
neither.
the
Yeah.
light waves pass through and at certain frequencies, then it turns into the color blue. If the frequency of the light waves was different, then it would look yellow. And then what it does to the rods and the cones in our eyes, and da 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 da, such that it appears blue. We don't need any of that. When I say keep it simple, I mean the sky is blue. So in this case, like, well, we'll go with Allswell's example with the 8-year-old and the ex saying negative things about the husband, to just say, I think he's a really good man. That can't be coaching. That's just really simple. And I think in general, we give too many details to children, and children are super, super, super skillful at imitation. So it just seems like they can catch and integrate all kinds of things. But the simpler we are about these kinds of things, the easier it is for the children. And I think the less the concern about coaching, because one of the things with coaching, I imagine, is if when the child says it, it sounds like they're parroting what the parent said.
Yes.
But
Right.
if you say it so simply, then the child can say it as though it's their own information. And I would imagine that the other attorney isn't going to call that coaching.
Got it. Okay. I love how you thought through that. I loved how you really contemplated it. And gosh, your suggestions are so simple and easy. And gosh, I've learned a lot during this live stream, Alexandra. And I think that you have a lot to offer people. So, can you share with people more about how you can help them and if they're interested in working with you or reaching out to you, how that might happen, please?
Yes, absolutely. So my website is alexandrastockwell.com, and I have a lot of different offerings. I've been on a lot of podcasts, so you're welcome to just like listen and immerse in my approach. And in particular today, I really am excited to offer the first chapter of my book. My book is called Uncompromising Intimacy. Oh, you're so welcome, Raul. My book is called, actually, you can see it right there, Uncompromising Intimacy. And the first chapter is called, Is Companionship as Good as It Gets? And when you read that chapter, you'll be able to see your past relationship, any current relationship you're in, and what to do to make them really good. So if you go to chapter.alexandrastockwell.com. Oh, yes. Thank you, Tenacious Warrior. There's my website, and it's chapter.alexandrastockwell.com. You can download that chapter. And I want to add, the reason that I'm offering that is that while my focus is on relationships and intimacy, I think the most important thing that I can do for children is teach their parents how to have really fantastic relationships. So even if you don't have a relationship currently, meaning you don't have a romantic partner, you have relationships. And I think you'll find a lot of value in what I share about how to speak with people in meaningful ways, addressing difficult topics. So I share my own divorce story. It's not specifically for divorced parents, but I think it'll be really worthwhile for anyone who enjoyed this conversation.
Awesome. I think a lot of people did enjoy this conversation, and I know more people will because usually we get a lot of people watching the replay if they couldn't make it. And I know these are weird times with the holidays, but I'm going to check the book out. And so if they want to purchase the book, can they purchase it on your website or Amazon or?
Yes, in fact, I can put the link for that too. Let me see here. I want to confirm that it's, let's see, alexandrastockwell.com /book. Maybe that's the link we should put up, because that gives you the option to just get the first chapter or the book or the Audible. So let's do that. It's alexandrastockwell.com /book.
Book. Okay.
Yes.
Excellent.
And I recorded the Audible, so you'll be able to hear me if you want more of that.
I love you have a great voice, a very relaxing voice, and you have a special way about you, Alexandra. And I think that anybody who has the opportunity to work with you is like really, truly very lucky and blessed. And, I hope that you'll come back and join me again sometime. Maybe we can talk about another topic that's relevant, that you have knowledge on. You mentioned the victim triangle or the something triangle. I'd love to learn about that because I haven't heard about it. So thank you for joining me today.
Really, my pleasure. I just really love that you have created this platform, and I'm looking forward to sending people to listen because there's such a huge need for what you're providing. So I'm honored to have been part of it.
Oh, thank you, Alexandra. And so, to all of my listeners out there, you guys, I want to wish you a happy holiday. I want to wish you safety and much happiness and joy and peace during this season. Yes, like the video and hit subscribe if you're on YouTube or Facebook. Another thing, I'm going to have another video coming up soon, a pre recorded video in the next day or two. And it's about new traditions with your children during this pandemic, during the holidays. And I can tell you, I've already implemented one of the suggestions, which is I went caroling around my neighborhood with my husband and daughter and some other neighborhood people. It was a socially distant activity. We had a blast. We made some people's nights. We got applause. So it was very fun. But you guys, thank you so much. This is going to be my last live stream of 2020. It's been
Ooh.
it's been an interesting year, a challenging year. I think we all have learned a lot, and I'm glad that all of you who are with me are still with me. I have some interesting, fun things coming in 2021, some cool guests coming up. So I'll be out for 3 weeks. But again, my heart is with you during the holidays. Thank you for being part of this community. I love you guys. Stay safe. Keep on trucking. Remember to get out there and command the courtroom. And I will see you next year. Yay. So good night, all. Love you guys. Bye.